So as far as politicians go, Senator Renneck is one of the better ones. He clearly understands money, banking, central banks, what they do. And here he's asking some questions. He's trying to make the point that, why did the RBA during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, why did they print $475 billion to push interest rates down to the lowest level they've ever been, to flood the government debt markets, to prop up state governments as they were doing lockdowns, and to fund consumption, to pay people to stay at home and not do anything because of the pandemic. And he's asking, the senator is asking the question, well, why can't the Reserve Bank of Australia act like an infrastructure bank and, quote, print money so that they can fund more infrastructure, so we can have more electricity, so we can have upgraded roads, or maybe high-speed rail, or things of that nature. So it's a fair point. I disagree with him. I don't think we should have a central bank at all. But let's go through and have a listen to some of the points that he's making.
Profits from that, in a productive manner, and using those profits to fund a development bank and a public bank.
I think your question around how does there's two elements to that I'm struggling to piece together. Sorry, Senator. One is I thought about the volume control of money, which gets to how monetary policy is set, and I might leave my RBA colleague to offer any views on that. But in terms of setting up a public bank, that's a question of government policy.
Right. Okay. I'll take that up with the Treasurer. And just in terms of volume of money, what's the RBA's view on that?
So what's the RBA?
We've shown that we've taken approaches to the to needing to stimulate the economy through the crisis period of the last 4 years in ways that were different to what had been experienced in Australia in the
Yeah, that's putting it lightly. Different. Oh, I got to see the soft language that they use. Oh, it's different to what we've done in the past. Yeah, it is a bit different. The RBA slashed interest rates to effectively zero. And if we have a look at the Australian Central Bank balance sheet, so this is in crude terms, this measures, quote, how much money the RBA has printed. You can see through 1995 to 2020. So that was the global financial crisis where they printed a whole, $50 billion and then they undid it. And then we got to 2020, the RBA's balance sheet, which measures the dollars that they've invented generally to buy government debt. They mostly hold bonds. They do have some other reserves, but mainly bonds. And you can see the balance sheet was at 100. Now that's in billion. 168,000 million is 168 billion. And they expanded their balance sheet to 645 billion. So they printed about $475 billion. I did the math before we started. So to call these, these are, measures we hadn't seen before. Yeah, you slashed interest rates to zero and you printed a whole bunch of money and you've created this inflation problem. You've created a housing shortage, et cetera, et cetera. Let's continue to listen.
Previous 20 years.
But that's a very good question. I mean, you've printed $300 billion and paid it to people to stay at home and watch TV and be terrorised by state premiers. My point is, if you can do that.
Okay, so the reason the senator is saying 300 billion, not 475 billion, is because he's counting the money that the RBA printed to buy government debt. But in addition to buying government debt, the Reserve Bank of Australia created something called the Term Funding Facility. Right, so the Term Funding Facility to support the Australian economy. No, it wasn't done to do that. They invented $188 billion in their computer, which they loaned to the banks at effectively 0% interest. It was 0.25 and then 0.1% interest. Okay, so here you can see from the Reserve Bank of Australia's own website that the money was loaned to the banks at 0.25% and then 0.1%. So a tiny fraction of interest. The RBA invented $188 billion in their computer, which they gave to the banks. CBA took 51 billion, NAB took 31 billion, Westpac took 29 billion. So that's money the banks got to borrow at a fraction of a percent of interest to turn around to loan to you to buy a house. Now at the time, that interest rate was probably about 1.9%, but now it's over 6%. So pretty easy to make many billions of dollars in profit when you get to borrow a bunch of dollars that the RBA created in their computer at practically zero interest and then loan it out to people to buy houses at a rate of interest that's 10, 20, 30 times what they're paying to borrow that money.
That for consumption, why not do it for production? And say, for example, lend money to a state or federal government to build a dam or a power station rather than just to sit at home and do nothing. Why can you do it for consumption?
So I think, as my colleague was saying, that it was a very crisis.
That's a great point from the senator. Now, I'm not in favour of any of this money printing or having a Reserve Bank of Australia and they can just invent billions of dollars in their computer whenever they feel like it. But if we are going to have that system, why not print the money to, build a power plant or to build some infrastructure? Why are they printing money so that governments can to fund government debt, so governments can run up debt, pay people to stay at home, pay people not to work, et cetera, et cetera? That seems like a very inefficient use of the money.
Economy at the time, there was huge levels of uncertainty, and in that period we went to very exceptional policy measures. And that
I hate these terms. Very, this RBA representative is, very exceptional policy measures. That I hate that language. It wasn't very exceptional policy measures. You tripled the size of your balance sheet, right? You printed all this money, you created the inflation, you distorted the economy by slashing interest rates to record low levels, causing people to borrow more money, because obviously if you lower the rate of interest, people are going to borrow more money. When you borrow money, you create dollars. So we expand the supply of money through the supply of money and debt in the economy. And we end up with a real estate hyperbubble where the average person can't afford to buy a house now in capital cities. Thank you, RBA, for doing that.
We're living in a cost of living crisis now. We've got power prices through the roof.
There
hasn't been enough investment in baseload energy for the last 20 years.
Exactly,
Surely this would warrant, some emergency productive stimulatory measures to go out and build some power stations. We've got it powered out there at Coburn Creek in Queensland. You can just put a power station, 400 million tonnes of coal, and can deliver more energy into the market, within a matter of 5 years.
Yep. If you're going to print money, that's a far better use of it.
Is it okay to print money just to spend it, pay people to stay at home, but not to actually fund the construction of sovereign infrastructure, which will help our regions and make them more profitable so banks stay open?
Great point.
I think from our perspective, it's back to the what should be happening in a more of a normal part of the economic cycle than was happening in that period during 2020, 2021.
Okay, government's building infrastructure is a normal part of the economic cycle. I mean, we've got a massive, and this is a Treasury policy, they're pushing a big Australia policy. We've got 500,000 immigrants in the last year. What are we doing to build infrastructure in those regions so the regions maintain, we can attract people out there and keep the branches open?
That's right. If you're bringing in 500,000 people, don't they need electricity? Don't they need roads to drive on, houses to live in? They need water. I mean, this is all common sense stuff. I don't know why he has to ask these. Like, credit to the senator for bringing up these points, but I don't know why these questions have to be asked. It's very obvious.
Senator, you're taking me outside my field of expertise when it comes to the Australian government's approach to infrastructure spending.
I doubt this guy has any areas of expertise.
How that works is managed by another department.
Sure.
And your sort of your proposition is setting up a kind of I guess my previous evidence was I'd have to take on notice any work that we've done looking at setting up an investment funding vehicle.
Yeah, sure, because one of the reasons why the branches are closing down is some of these towns are getting smaller because the essential services are drying up. They're drying up because of the lack of infrastructure spending. I guess that's my point.
So I'll just make one final point in that, and I'm sure the senator knows this, he doesn't need me to tell him, but for those of you who think the Reserve Bank of Australia is there to serve your interests or serve the interests of the people, they're not. The purpose of the Reserve, and they'll never admit this, but this is my opinion, and I think it's pretty obvious. During COVID, when they invented $475 billion and $188 billion of that went to the banks, how much of that money did you get? Did you get some free money from the Reserve Bank of Australia? Of course you didn't. The Reserve Bank of Australia's primary function is to preserve the interests and the profitability of the commercial banking cartels, to make sure Commonwealth Bank, NAB, ANZ, Westpac, that everything's functioning fine, that the government can borrow money at an acceptable rate of interest. And to the extent that they'll present it to you as, oh, it's helping you, I don't think it is. And credit to the senator for asking these questions. While I disagree with him on I don't want the government to have the power to, quote, print money and just, go, oh, we need to spend it on this, spend it on that. Like, printing money is very bad. It leads to inflation. That's a longer conversation for another topic and a 45-minute video. But credit to the senator, and I hope you got some value out of checking out this particular exchange. Thank you.